Tell me about the influence, man. Was the Crips and Bloods out here when you was 10, 11, 12 years old?
Yeah, it was Crips out here. It was Crips out here. It wasn't no Bloods. We had the BOYZs and up in Park Hill, but we didn't have no Bloods when I was 9, 10, 11 years old. But we did have Crips, 107 Hoovers, you know what I mean? Rolling 30 gangsters from the East Side, you know what I mean? East Side rolling 30s. You know, not to be confused with the LA rolling 30s.
Right.
What I mean?
So let me ask you this. When did you first meet the Bloods? When did the Bloods come out here, and when did you know about them?
I first met the Bloods in summer of like 1985. Like I said, we was in the stealing bikes. Me and my homeboy Basper, you know what I'm saying? We had stole some bikes, brand spanking new bikes from Kmart on Colorado Boulevard and like Evans. And we stole the bikes and we rode them back to the hood, and we was passing right up the street from here right now in Skyland Park. We was passing the park, and it was some older brothers, you know what I'm saying? They were older than us. I'm like 12, 13 at the time. Bash was like 14, 15 at the time, and we was passing the park, and they was like, hey, little man, y'all want to sell them bikes? You know what I mean? They was over there doing their thing, you know, pushing work and doing all that. So we took the bikes over to them. They were like, hey, man, how much you gonna get? They said $100. So they gave us $100 a piece for both bikes, you know what I mean? So we had $200. So we caught the bus right back up there and stole up some other ones, you know what I mean? You know, kept a little $100. And so in that process, you know, we had developed that little friendship with them. And then actually they bought those bikes from us as well, you know what I mean? So in the process of that, my homie Basper's sister, well, you know, she frequented the Holly, you know what I mean? You know, because it was a hangout, you know what I mean? Like I said, this is before the Bloods was. This was where the BOYZs hung out at. Old pimps, old players, you know what I mean? People who shoot dice, gamble, all that, you know what I mean? Just people in the game, period. Players, period. Hung out up here. So his sister frequented up here and hung out up here and did her thing up here. And so she had ran into Jaybird from Denver Lanes, you know what I mean? And I guess they started liking each other. So that brung it even better. So at this point in time, my big homeboy Mumbles was in the county jail fighting a little case, you know what I mean? But he used to call the house all the time. I never met him at this point in time. So when he's called the house, and I accept his phone calls, and I even got in trouble for it too, because the bill kind of got ran up a little bit. But so me and him corresponded, him and Bashford corresponded while he in jail. He touched down, get out of jail, and we clicked automatically. Like I said, he about 18, 19 at this time. He is, you know, about 17, 18, 19 at this point in time. But we clicked, me, him, and Bashford, and that's how the Crenshaw Mafia is as far as me and Basper claiming a set was due to Mumbos, you know what I'm saying? But we did have homies out here that was representing it, you know, Big Bob, Taco, you know what I'm saying? Hank, you know what I mean? We call him Markel, you know what I mean? His little brother, Lil B, Dane, you know what I'm saying? Money Mike, you know what I mean? Like I said, this is back in the 80s, you know what I mean?
So you saying some names, Taco and Dane. Are they the same Taco and Dane that come from Crenshaw Mafia in L.A.?
Yes, they are. They're from Inglewood, yeah.
Right.
Inglewood,
my bad.
Big Top, Big Dane, you know what I mean?
Right.
Big Mumbo, you know what I'm saying? You know, like I said, a lot of, hold on one second.
All right, so I had asked you about those names, and you said, yeah, those were the dudes from Inglewood. So then, I don't want to assume, I want to ask you then, does that mean that you and Basper are the only two that started that wasn't from Inglewood?
Exactly. We were the first two, actually. Me and Basper was the first two to actually be quoted, you know what I mean, on Crenshaw Mafia. That was actually from Denver. And like I said, I'm around 12, 13. He's around 14 or 15 at this time. I'm 48 years old now, so that lets you know how long we've been doing it. You know what I mean?
So following the influence of those guys from Inglewood, you and Basper influenced the rest of Denver, or the other population that eventually came, Crenshaw Mafia. Y'all the big homies, is that correct?
And Basper's big brother, Big D. And he came soon after us. Not too, you know what I mean? It was like right around the time, but me and Basper was the first ones quoted and devoted. You know what I mean? Then his big bro, Big D, which was hell of influent, you know, had a lot of influence on what went on because he was older than us. But he took on the flag and he held it high, and you know what I mean? He helped, you know, get us to where we're at to this day.
So let me ask
you know, nowadays they cleaned up the east side, and it's, you know, it's a little more safer for sure. But to this day, there's no hoods from the Bloods that moved over there and set up shop. But with that being said, there was, you know, a couple names and families that did not take on the Crip face, and actually they went the opposite way. Now people know these names as being linked with a bad case after a while. Boom and Bang. You can go look at, what they did and what they went to the penitentiary for, and it was horrendous, but we're not going to talk about that. We're just going to talk about when they were in the East Side and their get down over there. So Boom and Bang family members, they had family that lived on 27th in California. When the Crips had came to the East Side, they got into it with Crips from the East Side, and they got embedded with hatred for Crippin'. So they had some ties to Park Hill Crenshaw Mafia fools, and they decided to start up Deuce-Seven Bloods, like a chapter off of CMGs, and they tried to take it to the East Side, and they were hella active. These are the fools that would get CKs tatted on them, whacked out CKs, and they were about that action. Like I know numerous fools that had run-ins with them fools in the East Side. They didn't have a long time running in the East Side, but they did try to start their neighborhood in the East Side, and there was just too many fools around them that that was keyways. There was different neighborhoods from the East Side that bang Crip. You had the Comptons down the block on 29th in a rap hole, so they got into it with them fools. They got into it with East Side Denver Crips, and at that time too, even the ESGs, they used to rock Baby Blue, and the whole area was just Crip down. So I think it was a little too much for them, so they got smart and they started migrating towards the west side of Denver, and they started actually putting fools on. Now, these fools were alpha males when it came to gang banging, that when they went to the west side, them being east side fools, because Boom and Bang was east siders, like they were born and raised over there. When they went to the west side, they had the influence, on fools, because they had ties to Park Hill and all that, and them fools started up, a big chapter of Deuce-Seven Bloods. And Deuce-Seven Bloods, they have a big face in the west side. There's a lot of west side Deuce-Seven Bloods, but it was all started from some east side fools that just didn't get along with some Crips over there, and they made a whole wave.
Laying back to some of that old school Mile High history right here. And now this one ain't of the most upbeat type of energy. You know what I mean? This one right here is actually, kind of repulsive to me to even bring to y'all. But, it is part of Denver history though. You know what I mean? Boom and Bang were one of some of the originals of the Deuce-Seven Crenshaw Mafia Gangster Bloods. And I know y'all looking at the title and hearing that and y'all like, nah, there's only 10-fold. Yeah, I'm not here to politic on all that. You know what I mean? That's not my place. But what I am going to do is I'm going to present y'all what's out there for the world to see. And y'all can make your own conclusion about it, because, these cats were some riders. At one point in time, they really was some reputables. But the way that it went out and the black eye they put on their hood is terrible. It's a disgrace that will never be erased. So, but hey, yo, shout out to all the new subscribers. And shout out to the old ones too. I appreciate it, y'all. Y'all support really hits the heart right there. I really do appreciate it. But if you ain't subscribed, make sure you hit that subscribe button and hit that like button for your boy, so I can get in the algorithm. We can get this out to more people, and we can continuously grow this channel together. You feel me? But we almost at 1,000 subscriber marker. Once we get there, it'll be easier for me to start being able to go live and bring the the new and updated stuff that's coming out in front of y'all immediately. You feel me? But without further ado, let's get into it. 3 days after Christmas in 1998, there are a few reminders of the holiday in Teresa Swinston's Denver apartment. Although her faith remains strong, she doesn't feel like celebrating. Her son, Danny, is sitting in a Jefferson County jail cell awaiting the trial for a gang rape and murder of a 14-year-old girl. Brandy DuVall, the mention of her name evokes tears from Teresa, who's sitting on a couch in her living room surrounded by dozens of photographs of family. I pray to her all the time, she says. I try to tell her how sorry I am. She tilts her head and looks down as though the floor might open up and reveal why this had happened. When she is in a contemplative mood, she has a habit of affirming her comments with a nod and whispered, "Yeah." Try to tell her how sorry I am. "Yeah," she said. Danny's trial is set for February. If convicted, he could be put to death. As ashamed and as angry as she is with the 25-year-old son, her oldest son, she doesn't want him to die. She wants him to plead guilty to avoid the death penalty, even if it means abandoning his best friend Pancho to his fate and spending the rest of his life in prison. Quote, "I admit that's selfish," she says. Quote, "I don't want to sit through a trial and listen to what they did to that poor little girl, and I want him to be alive for his 2 little boys. But even more, I don't want her, the girl's mother, to have to go through another trial. I've told him that, but he's in denial." She pauses, looks down again, and says, "Yeah." Danny is telling her he can't accept a plea bargain unless Francisco Martinez, lets him know it's okay. Francisco has already been convicted of first-degree murder and faces a death penalty hearing in May. He told his lawyer, Dave Kaplan, that it was all right for Danny to save himself, but Danny doesn't trust lawyers, even Pancho's lawyer, and he wants his childhood friend to pass the word through Danny's sister, Raquel, or his brother, Antonio. Quote, "He says he doesn't want Pancho to think he's leaving him all to die by himself," says Teresa. "I asked him when I visited him last week, what about my feelings? Don't they matter? And what compassion for that girl's family?" And he said, quote, "Yes, but this is how I feel too. I can't say something to hurt Pancho." Daniel Martinez Jr., aka Bang, 25-year-old Francisco Pancho Martinez, and 17-year-old Frank Vigil Jr., aka Little Bang, are 3 of the 7 members of the Deuce-Seven Crenshaw Mafia Gangster Bloods originally charged with the first-degree murder, first-degree sexual assault, and second-degree kidnapping of Brandy DuVall. Her torn and bloody body was discovered next to a mountain stream west of Golden on May 31st of 1997. The other 4 members accepted plea bargains in exchange for their testimony. One of the government's 2-star witnesses, Samuel Quintana Jr., aka Zigzag, is the 25-year-old son of Teresa's sister. He confessed to the second-degree murders of not 1, but 2 young women to, quote, save himself, Teresa says. And the prosecutors bend over backwards to talk about this, quote, redeeming qualities and believe everything he says about what happened that night. The murder has frayed a once close-knit family. The government's other key witness is Jose Martinez Jr., the brother of Teresa's first husband, Daniel Martinez Sr., and her boy's uncle. Frank Vigil Jr.'s mother, Sally, was one of Teresa's best friends when the girls were growing up in Curtis Park. Sally's cousin, Pam, had been Jose Martinez's common-law wife. Sally married Pam's brother, Frank Vigil, and Teresa's brother, Oni, is married to Norma Quintana, another childhood friend of Teresa's and the sister of Sammy Quintana's father. Teresa still considers Sally Vigil one of her dearest friends, though they aren't as close as they once were, and Sally is coming apart with her middle son now sentenced to life in prison. Francisco's mother, Linda, who for years blamed Danny and Antonio and therefore Teresa for her son's involvement in the gang, wouldn't talk to her for months, and after Francisco was arrested, "Now we share our grief," Teresa says. But Teresa and her sister Patty, who's divorced from Sammy's father, are estranged. They haven't seen or spoken to each other since the day Sammy was arrested for Brandy's murder. Teresa remains close to Norma, but has nothing to say to Norma's brother Sam. And everybody is angry with Jose. Uncle Joe, but not as the prosecutors contend, because he's testifying. Quote, "Because he's allowed our children to get this deep into trouble when he could have stopped it," says Teresa. She knows what happened to Brandy was horrible and that the killers, including her son, should pay for what they did, but it doesn't seem fair. 51-year-old Jose, who used to run with bikers and throw himself into bar brawls with his brothers, claims he was afraid of the Bloods that night. Now he's emerging from a witness protection program to label their sons, his own nephew, animals, and DEVILS. He may never be welcome or even safe in Denver again, but he will walk away unscathed. Jose wasn't charged with anything, including the destruction of evidence. And Sammy, the prosecutors have said that when all the trials are over, they will seek the maximum penalty of 96 years in prison for Samuel Quintana. But Teresa doesn't believe them. She thinks they will find a way to reward him for giving up the others. Teresa has cut Sammy out of all her family photos. Still, it's hard for her to hate Sammy, who came to live with her and her 3 kids when his parents were divorcing, or to blame him for what he is doing. She just wishes she could believe he's doing it because his conscience bothers him. Teresa points to a recent photograph of 3 young children playing. Danny's twin sons and Sammy's daughter. Quote, they've all been told that this is their father's time in jail for something they did, she says. But they see each other all the time. They don't know what's going on. We take Danny's son to the jail to see him, and she goes right along. If the boys are visiting Sammy's daughter when that family goes to see Sammy in jail, Danny's boys go too. Quote, the boys love Sammy and write him letters, and we all love his little girl. Yeah. It isn't that she is trying to excuse Danny. He made his own choices, she says, but no one offered him a second-degree murder plea agreement. Then again, Danny took off when it became clear the police were closing in. Quote, I begged him not to run, Teresa says. Quote, I told him, let's give it up to God and go face this together, but he ran anyway. 6 months later, after Danny was finally caught, he balked at a deal that would have dropped a potential death penalty in exchange for life in prison without the possibility of parole. Daddy wouldn't go for it because the prosecution demanded that he write a statement describing not only his role in Brandy's murder, but that of the others. Danny would not snitch, nor is he accepting responsibility. Quote, he says he was drunk and doesn't remember, Teresa says. Quote, he says he can't read the transcripts from Frank and Pancho's trial, that he tries, but he can't. I tell him he has to if he's determined to go through with a trial, but he won't talk about it. Quote, he's real down on himself, I tell him. Quote, the Lord won't judge you for one incident. You have to look back and reflect that you were a very good person at other times in your life and ask for forgiveness. Quote, but he's confused. I got a letter from him today that he probably wrote on Christmas. He talked about his sister visiting him and this and that. Then at the end, he wrote, quote, I want to come home. Danny still thinks there's a chance he can beat the rap. His lawyers tell him he's fantasizing. Little Frankie didn't beat it. Pancho didn't beat it. It didn't take their juries much longer than the time needed to fill out the conviction papers before they returned with guilty verdicts. But Danny wants to believe that someday he will be free. Teresa stops to wipe a tear off her cheek. Quote, things are shitty for him, she says. Quote, but nothing compared to what that little girl went through. There is no excuse. I feel for that family and think of her mom all the time. Quote, the mother who will be sitting on the other side of the courtroom when Danny goes to trial. Teresa's friends have tried to prepare her for Danny's trial by feeding her bits of information about Brandy's final hours, but they're worried about the emotional state and have tiptoed around the worst of it. So Teresa prepares herself in ways she would have otherwise avoided. She reads the transcripts from the trials of Pancho Martinez and Frank Vigil so that nothing is said will shock her. She forces herself to watch movies that are violent to women so that she'll become numb to the brutality, just as she believes an entire generation of urban kids have been numb to violent films and rap music. Quote, I read horror and murder stories, she says. Quote, I don't like them, but Danny's lawyers are afraid of what my reaction will be in the courtroom. They didn't want me making any public displays. Neither does she. In fact, Teresa would rather not go into public at all. There are days when she doesn't want to get out of bed, much less go to work, or much less this than that, or go visit Danny and try to keep his spirits up while hers drag along the bottom. At times, Teresa feels nearly overwhelmed by guilt, not just for what her son and his friends did to Brandy DuVall, but for whatever deficiencies she had as a mother, for the lifestyle she exposed her boys to that made it impossible for her to fight the gangs for the souls of her sons. If there is anything to be gained in all of this, it's that some young mother might hear about this tragedy and realize that what she does in front of her children does matter. She thinks back to when she was a young girl, living in the house at 2727 California, the house where Danny and Antonio, Bang and Boom, first gained their gang notoriety. Their grandmother's house, for which they named their particular branch of the CMG, the Deuce-Seven. If she could just go back to where her boys were young, when she could have changed their lives, saved Danny's life. Antonio somehow walked away from his criminal past, graduated from art school, and got a job at a fancy tattoo parlor in another city. He works hard supporting himself, his girlfriend, and her son, and also sends money back to Denver to support his daughter. But to move on with his life, he had to distance himself from the brother he loved and from Francisco, whom he loved like a brother. Teresa won't let Antonio come back for the trial. Bad enough that she will still have to sit hour after hour on a hard wooden bench of the courtroom, staring at the back of her other son, the little boy who loved people and couldn't stand to be cooped up indoors, Danny. She loves him still and can't abandon him no matter what, and no matter what he did. Even if he participated in the rape and then stood on the hillside with little Frankie, watching why Pancho and Sammy stabbed Brandy dozens of times, then threw her like a piece of trash over an embankment. Quote, the law says that makes him just as guilty, a consequence for their total behavior that night, she says. Quote, but at least I won't have to sit there and hear that my son did the killing. May 31st of 1997. It was a great day to drive through the mountains. There were no clouds in the thin slice of sky that showed between the narrow walls of Clear Creek Canyon, and the sun was high enough to peek over the edge of the high rock, warming the early afternoon air. Lance Butler had the windows down as he guided his car along the curves of a two-lane highway of Highway 6, a few miles west of Golden. They were a couple of clean-cut college grads on their way to Central City for a day of gambling and beer. A mile or so past the point where Tunnel 1 burrows through the granite shoulder, the friend looked across the highway at the tumbling, rushing waters of Clear Creek. He suggested they stop and dip their feet. Quote, it'll be cold, Butler warned as he drove across the highway and pulled into a gravel turnoff at mile marker 296.5. They got out and stretched, and then they walked over to a narrow swath of grass. Just ahead, the ground suddenly dropped away to the stream 30 feet below. The embankment was a steep jumble of jagged boulders, too rugged to climb down. The friend was walking along the edge, looking for another way to the water when he pulled up short and pointed, there's a body down there. Butler thought his friend was joking, but he saw the blue of a pair of jeans and then the body, bare from the waist up, wedged in the rocks almost at the water's edge. Butler and his friend thought it looked like a body of a small man. They moved along the rim until they were directly above it and were trying to decide if they should get closer. Still, when they saw a darker red stain on the grass, it was a pool of blood and a couple of feet in diameter. They ran backwards towards the highway and started flagging down cars. This was a busy Saturday, and the highway was jammed with casino buses and other vehicles full of hopeful gamblers. Still, it took several minutes of frantic waving before someone pulled over. The driver tried to call out on a cellular telephone but couldn't get a signal past the high canyon walls. More cars stopped and other drivers dialed out but couldn't get through. In the meantime, tourists walked back and forth along the edge trying to get a look at the body. Finally, everyone decided to leave and find help. Quote, when you get to a telephone, call the police, Butler yelled as he ran to his car. A few minutes later, the Jefferson County Sheriff's dispatcher fielded several calls from Central City about a body and a lot of blood in Clear Creek Canyon. Diane Obeba was the first deputy to arrive at the mile marker of 296.5. She got out of her patrol car, took a few steps to the edge, and immediately saw the body. Then she began picking her way down through the boulders to see if she could help. The body belonged to a girl who was past help. She was lying on her back, her face turned to the sky, her eyes closed. Her head was nearly in the water, her bare feet pointed up the hill. A pair of silver-colored handcuffs bound her hands behind her back. She was covered in blood. Looking back up the hill, the officer could see a wide trail of blood beginning partway down the slope, smearing rocks, gravel, and plants as it led to the body. The girl had not died where the blood was pooled at the top of the embankment. She'd fought to live, falling and getting up, then falling, rising again and falling again, until she fell one final last time. The amount of blood shocked the 13-year sheriff veteran. There were places where it soaked into the ground between the rocks and then came out again lower on the slope. The officer scrambled back up to her car and the radio. Soon she was joined by sheriff's investigators, including Alan Simmons, the detective who would take the lead in the case, crime scene technicians, and an ambulance crew. Television teams arrived and filmed the body of a young identified female being removed from the river's edge in a black body bag. Simmons was there when Dr. Ben Galloway conducted the autopsy. The forensic pathologist had one performed approximately 9,000 autopsies during his career. Few were as disturbing as this one. The girl was young, barely a teenager, only 5 feet tall and 100 pounds. She'd been savagely attacked. The pathologist noted a bruise to the left side of her face that appeared to have been made with a fist. There was a large bruise on her chest as well as other bruises and abrasions on her arms and legs, which indicated that she struggled. Galloway counted 28 stab wounds, all made with a sharp single-edged knife. Some were to her chest, but most, including the fatal wounds, were to her back and neck. Her carotid artery and jugular vein had been pierced. She had bled to death. The most horrifying wounds, though, were not the ones that had killed her. The most horrifying wounds, though, were not the ones that had killed her. There was a big bite mark on her left breast. Her anus and rectum were badly bruised, purposely cut by a sharp blade. The last night of the girl's life had been hell. It took until Sunday, June 1st, to identify her as Brandy Rose DuVall. Brandy's mother had arrived at the Jefferson County's coroner's office looking for her missing daughter and found her on a cold steel table. "Wake up, baby, wake up," she yelled. Brandy had died 2 months shy of her 15th birthday. Teresa was 6 when her mother left her father and moved with her 7 children, 5 girls and 2 boys, into her grandparents' home near the corner of 27th and California Streets in Denver, Colorado. 2727 California. Teresa's grandparents, the Roderites, were strict. They had both come to this country from Mexico many years before. Grandfather would only speak Spanish, never apply for citizenship, and didn't work, except in his backyard, making and setting vegetable gardens. Grandmother, who bore 18 children, was a nurse and very religious. She went to every day to pray at her Sacred Heart Catholic Church and belonged to the Legion of Mary. Although the grandparents taught their children Spanish, they made no attempt to instruct their grandchildren. Many years later, when it mattered to her, Teresa asked her mother why she and her brothers and sisters weren't taught Spanish. Quote, "Because everybody thought children who spoke Spanish were slower or dumb immigrants," her mother replied. Quote, "And it just caused trouble for them at school." But Teresa always suspected it had more to do with the adult wanting a secret language they could use in front of the kids. As a child, Teresa thought she lived in the best neighborhood in the world. People took pride in their homes. They mowed the grass, battled dandelions, and raked leaves in the fall of every autumn from the old shade trees that lined the blocks. It seemed like everyone planted gardens and had flowers in front and vegetables in the back. The collection of small stucco and brick homes had seen a succession of immigrants come and go. Germans, Japanese, Mexicans, blacks. By the time Teresa moved there, it was mostly a black neighborhood with a strong contingent of Mexican families. But if the kids usually congregated in racially distinct groups, they still got along with each other. None of the kids seemed to notice that they were what people would consider poor. Most of what they did was free anyway: climbing trees, swinging at the playground at 25th and Stout, walking to the park to catch crawdads in the summer, and to the ice rink outside of the downtown May and D store to skate in the winter. Despite the poverty, there wasn't a lot of crime, at least not crime that affected the children. 5 Points, the legendary hub of black cultural and social life in Denver, was still jumping a few blocks to the east. There were no bums shuffling it down the sidewalks, no crack dealers standing in the shadows. What drug addicts there were stayed out of the sight. Some of the kids would hear rumors about a pimp shooting another pimp or beating up a prostitute. Maybe someone's junkie husband, son, or brother would overdose, necessitating a call for an ambulance and sparking a rash of gossip. But it was the grown-ups doing the crimes, not the kids, at least not yet. And there were always lots of kids. Teresa was as close as a sister to some of her neighborhood friends, especially Sally and Norma. As the girls grew older, they'd flirt with the boys and size them up for a future. Norma's brother, Sam Quintana, Frank Vigil, a distant cousin of Sally's, and the 5 Martinez brothers, Rudy, Jose, Tommy, and the twins, Dan and Ben. Soon climbing trees gave way to hanging out with other teenagers, kicking back to Motown music, blaring over car stereos, drinking beer, and smoking pot. A favorite spot was down at the Martinez brothers' house, where the boys were always working on their cars. Some of the boys were in gangs that took their names from where they lived. They were the 23rd Street or the Curtis Park or the Projects. No Bloods, no Crips, and no vice or no money involved. If a lowrider drove slowly through the neighborhood, it was to show off, not a prelude to a shooting. Gangs were all about fighting with rivals over dates, insults, and street corners, and it wasn't just the boys doing the scrapping. In the late 60s, the best place to find action was at the weekend dances sponsored by the Crusades for Justice. Corky Gonzalez and other Chicano activists had taken over a huge old downtown building where they tried to bring together Mexican kids from different parts of town. The Crusade workers wanted to promote unity. What they got were melees out in the parking lot. The guys would fight over turf. The girls would fight over the guys. Everyone knew there would be fights, no matter how much the Crusaders complained that they had too much in common trying to beat up each other. They just didn't understand, and it was all in good and fun. Teresa and her friends counted on those dances for entertainment. They even dressed for the evening's combat, reminding each other not to wear clothes they cared about. Nothing with buttons, no dangling earrings, not if you wanted to keep your earlobes from being torn off. The dances took place close to Teresa's neighborhood, which meant the kids from the north and the west sides of Denver were the invaders and at a disadvantage. The local girls would mess with the guys from another part of town just to get the other girls riled up. There'd be a fight. The police or the neighborhood adults would show up to break it up, and everyone would scatter. All through the week, they'd proudly display their bruises, black eyes, and scratches and look forward to the next dance. But the Crusade for Justice workers were right about one thing. They did have something in common. Nobody had much money. When they did have cash, it went for groceries or when the girls started having babies to buy their kids diapers and shoes. And in that neighborhood, the girls started having babies when they were hardly more than children themselves. Teresa was no different. She was a wild thing who rebelled against her strict mother and grandparents. In their house, drinking and cigarettes were forbidden. So was cussing. So she stayed out until all hours, drinking and carousing, hiding when she'd hear her mother walking up and down the street late at night, demanding in a loud voice that Teresa come home. More than once, she woke up in a closet of a friend's bedroom with her hands still wrapped around a bottle. Big-breasted and pretty, Teresa looked like a woman long before she was one. When she was 12, one of the Martinez brothers, 16-year-old Danny, took an interest in her. She lied and told him she was 15, and the chase was on. Danny wasn't very big, but he already had a reputation for taking what he wanted and not letting anybody stand in his way. And what he wanted was Teresa. What she wanted was someone who would promise to take care of her and get her out of the crowded house at 2727 California. She thought she was in love. Teresa's mother never had remarried. She scraped and saved to raise her kids on welfare and never went out except to work and after her youngest, Jimmy, who was old enough to go to school. Her grandparents slept in separate rooms and seemed to speak to each other only when they had to. There was always plenty of food sitting on the stove, but the family rarely sat down together to eat. Ever since she could remember, Teresa had envied Danny's family life and adored his parents. She thought they were the perfect couple. She never saw them fight or even argue. He called her mama and she called him daddy. If they were watching television and she noticed him starting to nod off, she'd say, "Daddy, you're sleepy, go to bed." And he'd reply, "Not until you do, mama." That's the sort of marriage she wanted someday. Danny's father, Joe, was a hard-working roofer, a good man, fair with his 5 boys and 3 girls. He loved to laugh and wasn't afraid to demonstrate his love for his family. Danny's mother, Ida, was a sweet, caring woman who seemed to believe that it was her responsibility to feed any kid in the neighborhood who happened to be there around mealtime. All the family members spent a good deal of time hugging each other. The Martinez treated Teresa like a little sister, but Danny had other ideas. She was 15 when they had their first child, Raquel. They married when she was 16 and pregnant with Danny Jr. After they married, the young couple moved across the street into a fourplex. Danny worked for his dad. When he came home hot and tired, she'd have a bath ready. Then every night they'd go across the street to his parents' home for dinner. Meals were a crowded, noisy, laughing affair. Everyone, the parents, their boys, their girlfriends, wives, children, and assorted neighborhood visitors would sit down at the table to eat. They never knew what they were going to get. During lean times, it might just be meatloaf, but there were always hot green chilies and a big stack of homemade tortillas fresh off the stove. It was a rough and tumbled household. Joe smoked huge cigars and Ida puffed cigarette after cigarette. They all drank beer, especially the boys, who would get drunk and wrestle around the house until they were told to take it outside. A favorite pastime was to go to a bar and start a brawl. One minute everything would be quiet, the next all hell would break loose. Teresa loved it. She'd married into the sort of family she had always wanted and thought her children would grow up safe and well loved in the arms of that family. June 2nd of 1997. The day after Brandy DuVall's body was identified by her mother, Jeffco Sheriff's investigators Doug Moore and Jeffrey Pevler visited Patrice Bowman. The 15-year-old black girl was one of Brandy's best friends and had been with her that night of May 30th. Patrice admitted that she and Brandy had smoked marijuana and drunk most of a six-pack of beer, which a man they met at a bus stop had purchased for them in exchange for one of the beers. Brandy had left a little after 11 p.m., headed for a bus stop on South Federal Boulevard where she could catch a ride back to her grandparents' house. She'd been wearing a red Chicago Bulls jersey, black shorts, and a red and black and white Nike running shoes. After talking with Patrice, the investigators were 5 hours closer to Brandy's murder, but still had many unanswered questions. Where were her clothes? The light blue jeans she'd been wearing when her body was found were several sizes too big for her, and otherwise she was nude. But the trail dead-ended at the bus stop on South Federal in Florida. They hoped someone had seen her could narrow the time gap even further. Maybe someone had even glimpsed the face of Brandy's killer. Federal Boulevard was a busy thoroughfare even at the time of night. A lot of teens, some of them homeless and on their own, hung out on corners and in parking lots. On a Saturday night, lowriders and gang members alike might be cruising the streets, showing off and looking for action. Someone must have seen something. On June 10th, investigators Simmons received a call from an informant who said that a man named Jose Martinez had told him that Brandy DuVall had been assaulted by the Bloods at his home on the night of the May 30th, 1997. On June 12th of 1997, Simmons and investigator Ralph Gallegos contacted Jose Martinez at the house he rented at 3165 West Hawthorne Place in Adams County. Martinez quickly confessed to having been the unwilling witness to the rape and torture of a teenage girl. She'd been brought to his house by a blood gang member he knew only as Baby G and 4 others he didn't know at all. Already there, getting drunk and high, were his nephew Daniel Bang Martinez Jr., Francisco Martinez, aka Pancho, Frank Vigil Jr., aka Little Bang, and a boy named Zigzag. The gang had, quote-unquote, the devil in him that night, Jose Martinez said. He'd been unable to stop what they had done to that, quote-unquote, poor little girl. The girl was still alive when they finally left his house before dawn, begging to be taken to a hospital. After that, he cleaned up his house and found the girl's clothes as well as her high school identification card. The name on the card was the same one he heard later on the television news. Simmons asked Martinez if he kept any of Brandy's personal effects that would help corroborate his story in court. Martinez shook his head. His nephew Danny and the boy he knew as Zigzag had come over and taken the girl's things, including the identification card, a B-shaped diamond pendant, and the bloody mattress of the bed where she had been raped and tortured. Nothing, quote, said the investigator. Martinez gave in. He went to his kitchen and removed something from under the sink. It was a small prayer card. He told the investigators he kept it because he liked it and that he thought he might need something if the police ever showed up asking about the girl.